Sometimes we forget that behind every impossible three-pointer, every slow-motion dunk, or every champion scream, there's a heart that beats just like ours. It doesn't matter how many millions they make or how many followers they have on Instagram, NBA players cry too. They also suffer, they also break. And when that happens, when the show pauses for a second and the world stops looking at the stats, that's when the moments that can't be forgotten appear. Not because of the record, not because of the ring, but because of the human side. Because in a league where everything seems designed for spectacle, there are moments that break even the coldest person. Players breaking down in public, fathers who are no longer here, children who can't fulfill the dream, lives that change forever in front of thousands and leave us with a lump in our throat. This isn't a highlight reel. You won't see the best dunk or the most epic play, but you will relive the moments where emotion beat the sport. And where the silence of an entire stadium said more than 1,000 screaming commentators. Because sometimes basketball becomes something else. Draft night is, for many players, the moment when everything becomes real. The name on the screen, the handshake with the commissioner, the team hat on their head. It's the end of an eternal wait and the beginning of a dream life. But in 2014, there was one name that was heard among the applause, without a contract, without a team, without a future on the court. Isaiah Austin, center from Baylor, one of the most solid prospects in college basketball. He was projected to be selected in the first round. He had it all: height, talent, and a story of perseverance, having played with partial vision in one eye. But just days before the draft, a medical check shattered his life, Marfan, a genetic disorder that weakens the body's connective tissues, and in his case, it meant just one thing: competitive basketball was over before it even began. The news was devastating. The dream ended before it started. But that night, the NBA did something it doesn't usually do. Commissioner Adam Silver asked for silence, and with a trembling voice, he announced,
"I want to take a moment to recognize Baylor center Isaiah Austin. You may have heard about Isaiah. He is one of the nation's best collegiate players and was expected to be picked tonight before the discovery just a few days ago that he had a genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome and is no longer able to play competitive basketball. So it gives me great pleasure to say that with the next pick in the 2014 NBA draft, the NBA selects Isaiah Austin from Baylor University."
With the next pick in the 2014 NBA draft, the NBA selects Isaiah Austin from Baylor University. It wasn't a real selection, there was no team, no contract, but there was something much more powerful: respect, recognition, dignity. It was a symbolic moment, but brutally human. Isaiah walked up to the stage with tears that weren't asking for pity. It was pure gratitude for a gesture that gave him back, even if just for a moment, the dream. "I will be part of the NBA family forever," he said afterward, voice shaking. And yes, he was, not for what he played, but for what he represented. Because sometimes being part of something isn't about minutes on the court, it's about the heart. It was October 17th, 2017, first game of the regular season, Celtics versus Cavaliers. An opening night full of hype with all eyes on Boston's new Big Three. Kyrie Irving, freshly arrived, Al Horford, and Gordon Hayward, the star signing. Everything was set for a celebration. It lasted 5 minutes. In an ordinary play with no drama, Hayward jumped for an alley-oop. Nothing unusual, but when he landed, his right leg bent in an impossible way. Instantly, the arena froze. The cheers, the clapping, the flashes, silence, just silence. He was on the floor, motionless, his foot hanging at an inhuman angle. The broadcast cut away. Players held their heads. Some dropped to their knees to pray, others cried on the bench. It looked more like an emergency room than an NBA arena, and that's no exaggeration. The injury was so severe, so graphic, that to this day, some platforms automatically censor it. Gordon had come in with everything. He was in peak physical condition. It was his Boston debut on national television with millions watching, and in seconds, his body broke. And so did his life plan, because the message was clear: you don't know if you're coming back. But the man didn't fully break. Literally the next game, even though he was still stuck in a bed, he showed up via video call at the arena. No need, no obligation. With his leg in a cast and tears in his eyes, he recorded a simple, almost homemade message for his team and the fans. "Thank you for the messages, the thoughts, the prayers. I won't be there, but I'm supporting you guys. Let's go all out tonight." It wasn't a heroic speech, it wasn't epic, but it was real, human, and that's what made it one of the most emotional moments we've ever seen. Because in a world where everything is scripted, Hayward showed something you can't fake: the pain of losing it all, and the will to start again. When Kevin Durant stepped on stage to receive the MVP award for the 2013 to 2014 season, no one expected what was about to happen. He had dominated everything, averaging over 32 points per game, leading Oklahoma to second place in the West and proving he was ready to sit at the table with the all-time greats. But on May 6th, 2014, in front of the microphone, it wasn't the superstar who showed up, it was the son. Durant held the trophy, looked at it for a second, then raised his eyes to the front row, and he broke down. What followed wasn't a traditional speech, it wasn't a list of accomplishments or a thanks to the team. It was a life confession, an open letter to the woman who raised him. You woke me up in the middle of the night to run. You yelled from the sidelines when I was 8 years old. You fed us when you weren't eating. You clothed us when there was no money. You took us off the streets. You are the real MVP.
You sacrificed for us. You the real MVP.
And in that moment, the room froze. Not from coldness, but from respect. Durant was crying, his mother was crying, and so were the people watching. Because in that moment, the barrier between athlete and human being disappeared. It was a story told in a trembling voice with truth laid bare. Then came the memes, of course. The famous "You the real MVP" became a t-shirt slogan, a sticker, a catchphrase. But what many forget is that this moment wasn't staged, it wasn't crafted to go viral. It was a sincere expression, one we rarely see in a world where everything is carefully scripted. Durant wasn't looking for applause, he was looking to give thanks. And in doing so, he achieved something very few ever do. He let millions see him cry, and earned even more respect for it. On a March night in 2023, after a 108-100 loss to the Clippers in Los Angeles, something in Fred VanVleet exploded. It wasn't frustration over the result, it was anger from feeling like the game had been stolen by the referees. The Clippers went to the free throw line 31 times while the Raptors had just 14 attempts, 23 fouls to 18, and in the middle of it all, a key play stood out. With 7:02 left in the third quarter, VanVleet was hit with a technical foul, almost without protesting, just for trying to motivate his team during a clear streak of controversial calls. The last straw was that tech. It changed the whole dynamic of the game, the flow. He said afterward, that flow he talked about isn't just rhythm, it's trust, it's energy. And after that whistle, he felt everything collapse. Immediately after the game, facing the microphones, he let out an epic outburst. Ben Taylor was fucking terrible tonight. A couple of referees mess up the game.
I mean, I don't mind. I'll take a fine. I don't really care. I thought, Ben Taylor was fucking terrible tonight.
He didn't say it to chase likes. He said it cold, angry, real. The NBA fined him $30,000 the next day for public criticism of officiating, but VanVleet didn't back down. He explained that he was tired of trying to raise concerns internally, that he felt it was personal with that referee, that his techs were disproportionate. 3 out of his 8 technicals that season had come with Taylor on the court. What does a fine really achieve? VanVleet saw it differently. Most of the refs are honest, but some of them want to be the stars and they ruin the game. People don't pay to see the referees, they come to see the players. And there were real consequences. Sources said Taylor lost standing and began to receive lower profile assignments, as if the league quietly acknowledged something wasn't right. This moment wasn't a tantrum. It was the honest voice of a player who felt like his effort was being stolen, a guy who gave everything to win and watched a whistle crush it all, and he didn't ask permission to speak up. He shouted it loud out of respect for his game and for his people. There's no script that can prepare you for a tragedy like this. On February 13th, 2023, a mass shooting shook the campus of Michigan State University. A gunman killed 3 students and injured 5 more. Among the survivors was John Howe, a 20-year-old. A die-hard Philadelphia 76ers fan, a James Harden fan, and now paralyzed from the chest down. The story reached Harden through a GoFundMe campaign that quickly went viral. And what the player did wasn't just a feel-good gesture, it wasn't a generic post with prayer emojis, it was something far more intimate and honest. Harden got in touch with John's family and arranged a FaceTime call. He talked to him, he listened, he promised they'd talk again, he sent him a pair of game-worn sneakers, he donated money for his treatment, but above all, he gave him something money and fame can't buy: presence. At the hospital, John was broken, not just physically, emotionally. A 20-year-old kid who had lost mobility, plans, routine, everything. But when asked if he wanted to leave a message, he said just one word: thank you. And Harden heard him. Not as a superstar, not as a public figure, as a man. And he responded with something that doesn't show up on stat sheets: humanity. Later, Harden said all he wanted was to make him smile even for a minute. He told him his phone line would always be open, that if he recovered, he wanted to invite him to a game. In a world where idols are surrounded by walls, James Harden did something few expect from a superstar. He let his guard down, he knelt before someone else's pain, and stood by him. Because sometimes it's not about dropping 40 points. Sometimes it's about not looking the other way. Throughout his career, Russell Westbrook endured it all. Criticism, memes, losses, betrayals, injuries, but he never broke until they started messing with his last name. During the 2021 to 2022 season, his first as a Los Angeles Laker, Westbrook arrived with sky-high expectations. He was coming home back to Southern California and was supposed to be the perfect explosive complement to LeBron and AD. But on the court, nothing worked. Bricks, forced decisions, ugly turnovers, and with that came the commentary. First on Twitter, then on ESPN, then in the arenas, Westbrick. It was a play on words, a joke. But it started to spread like a virus. Analysts thought it was clever, fans thought it was funny, trolls found it addictive, but for his family, it was none of that. His wife Nina said it on social media. They were receiving threats, insults, mockery, at games, at schools, even in the street. And that's when Russell, who had always avoided publicly confronting the media, said enough. In March 2022, after a tense game, he sat down at a press conference and put the basketball aside. My wife told me she doesn't want to come to games anymore. My mom called me, worried, and the worst part, my son is in school, proud of his last name. He writes Westbrook everywhere, and I can't allow that to be destroyed.
Noah, he's so proud of his last name. He writes it everywhere. He writes it on everything. He tells everybody, he walks around and says, people, for example, Westbrook to me is now shaming, like it's shaming my name. It's my legacy for my kids. It's a name that means more, not just to me, but to my wife, to my mom, my dad, the ones, and it affects them even going to games. I don't even want to bring my kids to the game because I don't want them to hear people calling their dad nicknames and out of their names for no reason because he's playing the game that he loves.
He didn't yell, he didn't cry, he spoke with the voice of someone exhausted. He wasn't asking for respect as a star, he was asking for it as a father. The NBA, of course, didn't fine anyone, because hate disguised as humor doesn't always come with punishment, and that was what hurt the most, that his effort, his legacy, his name were reduced to an internet joke. That day, Westbrook wasn't defending himself. He was defending his son's right to be proud of who he is, and that, beyond the triple-doubles, might have been his most important play. Kawhi Leonard doesn't smile, he doesn't yell, he doesn't celebrate, he doesn't complain. He seems like he was designed in an AI lab, a guy who shows up, drops 30 points, and leaves without saying a word. That's why when in September 2018 he let out that laugh during his introductory press conference with the Toronto Raptors, the whole world didn't know whether to laugh or call a robotics technician. I'm a fun guy. Obviously, I love the game of basketball, but in order for you to know more about me, you'd have to ask me more questions. And there it was. That forced, metallic, broken up laugh that sounded more like a glitch than genuine emotion. It became a phenomenon. Comedy shows replayed it. It got remixed into songs. People said it as their ringtone. The meme was ready-made. But if you dig a little deeper, what happened that afternoon in Toronto wasn't just a funny moment. It was the first time Kawhi, who had been completely silent for months after his messy exit from San Antonio, tried to show himself as a person, not as a player, not as a stat line, as someone who, even if it doesn't seem like it, also had to rebuild his image, break through prejudice, and start from scratch. Because what most people forget is that when Leonard arrived in Toronto that September, he was surrounded by doubt. Was he healthy? Would he even want to play? Was he committed or just a silent diva? And there he was, a guy shy to his core, having to give a press conference to convince an entire city that he was worth it. So yes, the laugh was weird, awkward, but it was his, it was real. In a world where everything is perfectly curated, he showed an uncomfortable moment without shame. And without meaning to, that moment humanized him to millions. And then, well, he ended up being Finals MVP and giving Toronto the only ring in its history, with the same poker face. But now, everyone knew something else about him. That behind the robot, there's a guy just trying to fit in too. There are games that win you a championship, others that bring you fame, and then there are those that give you your soul back. For Derrick Rose, that happened on October 31st, 2018. Just an ordinary night in Minnesota playing for the Timberwolves, but for him, it was all or nothing. D-Rose had come from years of darkness After becoming the youngest MVP in history in 2011, his career turned into a surgical nightmare. Torn knees, operations, minimum contracts, meaningless trades. People no longer mentioned him among the greats. Analysts declared him finished. Even he, in more than one interview, admitted he didn't know who he was anymore. And then, that Halloween night against Utah, something lit up. It wasn't a spectacular start, it was gradual, slow, as if something inside him was starting to break free. A layup, a three, a step back, another, more. Every basket was an act of defiance, as if he were telling the universe, I'm still here. What was impressive wasn't just the stats, it was how he did it. He played 41 minutes, hit 19 of his 31 shots, including 4 threes and 8 of 11 from the line. But it wasn't just about efficiency, it was about control, composure, silent fire. He scored 15 points in the fourth quarter, many of them clutch. In the final seconds, with Utah pressing hard, it was Rose who nailed the free throws to seal the win. And as if that wasn't enough, on the last defensive play, he flew from the baseline to block Dante Exum's three-point attempt. Perfect finish, 50 points, a new career high. Not even during his MVP season had he done that. But the most powerful moment wasn't on the stat sheet, it was the end. The sound of the buzzer. And Rose collapsed on the court, crying like a kid. Not from victory, not for fame, for relief. When they put the microphone in front of him, he couldn't even speak. "This means a lot to me," was all he could say. And behind him, the whole team hugged him like he had just won a championship. That night, Derrick Rose didn't become the MVP again, but he became himself again, the kid from Chicago who just dreamed of playing, not of being a star, the one who had gone through more surgeries than full seasons, the one everyone had written off, the one who had accepted he was no longer the D-Rose, but who still stepped onto the court and gave everything. And he achieved something very few ever do. He moved an entire sport. There's no victory harder than the one you can't share with the person who mattered most. For Michael Jordan, that person was his father, James Jordan, his best friend, his guide, his shadow at every game, the man who was there from the first free throw to the last championship ring. But in July 1993, MJ's world shattered. His father was murdered while sleeping inside his car, parked on the side of a road in North Carolina. 2 teenagers killed him to steal the Lexus Michael had given him. It was a blow too heavy to process. And for Jordan, already worn down by fame, media, and relentless pressure, it was the end of something. So he retired, he walked away, he vanished from basketball until he came back, and 3 years later, in 1996, his team, the Bulls, once again reached the NBA Finals. The series against Seattle was 3-2, and Game 6 fell on June 16th, Father's Day. Everything aligned in a painfully perfect way, because that night Jordan wasn't just playing for another ring, he was playing for his dad, for the man who wasn't in the stands, who wouldn't be there to throw his arms around him, who wouldn't be in the championship photo. And even so, Jordan did what he always did best, he dominated. He finished the game with 22 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, and a fire that couldn't be measured by stats. It wasn't his best performance on paper, but it was, without a doubt, the most symbolic game of his career. When the final buzzer sounded and the Bulls secured the title, Michael didn't yell, he didn't jump, he didn't throw a fist into the air. He knelt on the locker room floor with the game ball in his arms, crying like a kid, his face buried in a towel, sobbing uncontrollably. He was the best in the world, but in that moment, he was just a son who missed his dad. The cameras caught it, but no one dared interrupt. The air was heavy because everyone knew this ring wasn't like the others. It was a message to the sky, a way of saying, we did it one more time, together. There are pieces of news you remember exactly where you were when you heard them, as if time froze in that moment. January 26th, 2020 was one of those days. On a quiet Sunday morning, the rumors started to circulate. Confusion, silence, disbelief, and then the brutal confirmation Kobe Bryant had died in a helicopter crash in Calabasas, California. He was traveling with his 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 7 others. There were no survivors. The impact was immediate. But what was most shocking was the scale. Not just Lakers fans, not just the NBA, the entire world stopped because Kobe was more than basketball. He was mindset, he was discipline, he was the voice pushing you to train when you didn't want to never give up, to compete with an almost irrational fire. He was Mamba, and suddenly he was gone. That same day, the games weren't canceled, but every court turned into a shrine. Teams intentionally took 24-second shot clock violations, others 8-second backcourt violations, nods to his jersey numbers. Players cried before tip-off, some couldn't even warm up. Coaches hugged on the bench in silence, and fans for the first time in a long time didn't cheer. At the Staples Center, his home, his sanctuary, thousands gathered spontaneously. Jerseys, flowers, candles, messages written in marker. The arena was empty inside, but outside it was a sea of mourning. When the Lakers finally played again, they did the only thing they could, turned the game into a tribute. Every player was introduced as Kobe Bryant. The national anthem played through tears, and LeBron, with his heart on his sleeve, said what no one else dared to. Kobe said, "Mamba out." We say, "We'll never forget you, brother."
So in the words of Kobe Bryant, Mamba out, but in the words of us, not forgotten. Live on, brother.
The NBA didn't take long to respond. The All-Star Game format was changed in his honor. The event's MVP award was renamed the Kobe Bryant Trophy. Street courts were renamed, murals bloomed like flowers on concrete. Even in the Philippines, they painted his face alongside national heroes because Kobe wasn't just Lakers, he was a global language. And what made it even harder was that he seemed to be entering the best chapter of his life, away from the spotlight, raising his daughters, writing stories, producing content. The man who had once been accused, loved, hated, and redeemed was becoming something else. A present father, a mentor, a man who finally could breathe, but he never got there. And maybe that's why the wound cut so deep, because it wasn't just a legend who died, it was the promise of a new version of him, one we never got to see. Since then, every time someone shoots a ball and yells Kobe, it's not just nostalgia, it's respect. Because deep down, we all know there was a man who gave everything to the game, even his shadow. The NBA is filled with lights, a perfectly choreographed show. Something breaks the spectacle and makes it real. No replay, no slow motion, no commentator to explain it. Just a moment where you see a player stop being a legend and become a person. A father crying because he can't take his child to the arena. An MVP falling apart in front of his mother. A strange laugh that, without meaning to, reveals more than 1,000 interviews. Those moments don't make the highlights. They don't have sponsors, they don't sell sneakers, but they stay. And maybe, without realizing it, they're the ones that stay with us the most. Because when a player breaks down in front of thousands, it doesn't matter how many rings he has. What matters is that for a second we understand him. He represents us. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.